Good evening. Tonight, across a huge and uneasy region where Arab Spring has long ago faded into something far more complicated. Today, there were anti-U.S. protests in no fewer than 11 separate locations. And of course, this follows the initial explosion of violence in Cairo, where protesters stormed the U.S. embassy. Then that terrible lightning attack on the U.S. consulate in Benghazi, Libya, that left the U.S. ambassador and 3 other Americans dead. First ambassador murdered on the job in a generation. Some of this violence is stemming from an anti-Islam film made here in the U.S., and there are fears we are in for a period of violence and uncertainty aimed at this country and across a big region. We begin our reporting tonight with our chief foreign correspondent, Richard Engel, who's back in Tahrir Square in Cairo, where, by the way, they're reporting 200 injuries over at the U.S. Embassy today. Richard, good evening.
Good evening, Brian. Clashes are still continuing here, even at this late hour, near the U.S. Embassy, and they were not the only ones in this region. This mess in the Middle East isn't over yet. The protesters in Yemen set out to destroy the American embassy in Sana'a to punish an insult against Islam. Protesters climbed the perimeter fence, undeterred by Yemeni security forces who tried to keep them back with water cannons. The crowds pushed forward and managed to get inside the embassy parking lot, smashing windows, torching vehicles, using a forklift to do even more damage. This time, the U.S. Embassy was prepared. Staff was moved to a safe location. No one was hurt. In Cairo, another embassy under siege. But Egyptian security forces are finally taking decisive action. Riot police battled demonstrators all day. More than 200 were overcome by tear gas. As the air burned with the stuff, protesters told me their goal was to get to the Cairo embassy and take vengeance. Why, I asked. Because the United States has insulted the prophet, they screamed. Repeated U.S. statements that Washington has no affiliation with the offensive internet movie that sparked this crisis aren't being listened to here, just religious passion and the blindness of a mob. And Egypt's new president isn't doing much to calm things. President Mohamed Morsi from the Muslim Brotherhood said he supports protests against religious insults, but he also denounced attacks on foreign embassies. It was a condemnation, but a couched one. Egypt needs the West. Morsi is looking for nearly $5 billion in loans from the International Monetary Fund. The protests in Egypt and Yemen are small, but not isolated. There have been angry demonstrations in 11 countries so far. Half of them in places where Washington supported protesters who toppled their regimes, bringing more democracy, but also unleashing deep hatred and zealotry that is now focused on U.S. properties overseas. More protests, Brian, are expected here tomorrow, but in a positive note, they are not supposed to be near any embassies. In Libya, authorities say they have started making arrests in connection with the consulate bombing and that they have more militants under surveillance. An FBI team is expected to arrive soon, and reinforcements, about 50 Marines, have already arrived at the U.S. Embassy in Tripoli.
All right, Brian? Richard Engel back in Tahrir Square in Cairo tonight. Richard, thanks.